They singled her out from the crowd, an elderly woman sitting quietly in the hospital waiting room. Nothing remarkable at first glance, just another patient to process, to scrutinize, to dismiss. But when hospital security ordered her to open her handbag for inspection, something in her eyes changed. Not fear, not anger. Something deeper, as if a long-buried memory had suddenly resurfaced. The officers smirked as they began rifling through her belongings, never suspecting that this routine harassment would become a moment none of them would ever forget. Before we continue this incredible story, tell us in the comments, from which city in the world are you watching this video today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button and help Hidden Hero Stories honor the quiet veterans who walk among us. The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Memorial Hospital cast their familiar, harsh glow across the emergency department waiting room on that Tuesday morning in October. Rows of uncomfortable plastic chairs held the usual collection of patients and families. A mother holding a feverish toddler, an elderly man reading yesterday's newspaper, teenagers scrolling through their phones, and scattered throughout, the worried faces of people waiting for news about loved ones. In chair 23B, near the window overlooking the parking lot, sat Grace Thompson. At 74, she embodied what most people expected from a woman her age: silver hair neatly pinned back, wearing a simple navy cardigan over a floral print dress, sensible shoes with thick soles, and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. Her hands, marked with age spots and the slight tremor that comes with decades of living, held a worn leather handbag in her lap. Grace had been waiting for 45 minutes for her appointment with Dr. Martinez, the cardiologist who'd been monitoring her heart condition for the past 2 years. The shrapnel fragments lodged near her heart, souvenirs from a mortar attack in Da Nang in 1969, had been shifting recently, causing irregular rhythms that concerned her physician. But Grace waited patiently, as she'd learned to do long ago, watching the controlled chaos of the emergency department with quiet observation. What the other patients didn't notice was how Grace's eyes moved constantly, scanning exits, noting the positions of security cameras, cataloging potential threats and escape routes. What they mistook for the nervous fidgeting of an anxious elderly woman was actually the ingrained situational awareness of someone who'd spent months in combat zones where a moment's inattention could mean death. Miguel Rodriguez had been working hospital security for 3 years, ever since his discharge from the Army National Guard. At 28, he approached his job with the enthusiasm of someone who'd never seen real action, but imagined himself as a guardian of order. His partner, James Martinez, no relation to Grace's doctor, was older, more experienced, and generally more interested in completing his shift without incident than in proving anything to anyone. Rodriguez had been watching Grace for the past 20 minutes, and something about her bothered him. She kept clutching that handbag, never setting it down, never relaxing her grip. In his limited experience, that meant she was hiding something. Drugs, maybe, or stolen items from other patients' rooms. He'd read about elderly people developing kleptomania, and this woman fit the profile perfectly. "See that old lady over there?" Rodriguez nudged Martinez, pointing toward Grace. "She's been holding that bag like it contains gold bars. I think we should check it out." Martinez glanced over at Grace and saw exactly what anyone else would see: a frail, elderly woman waiting for a medical appointment. "Miguel? She's probably just nervous about her appointment. Leave her alone." "No, man, something's off about her. Look how she keeps watching everyone, and she won't put that bag down for a second. I'm telling you, she's up to something." Martinez sighed. He'd worked with Rodriguez long enough to know that the younger man wouldn't let this go. Sometimes it was easier to indulge his suspicions and move on. "Fine, but we do this quietly and respectfully. She's someone's grandmother." Grace noticed the security guards approaching before they were halfway across the waiting room. Their body language telegraphed their intentions clearly. The younger one walked with aggressive confidence, while the older one followed reluctantly. She'd seen this dynamic thousands of times, eager authority figures looking for someone to hassle, usually choosing targets they perceived as vulnerable. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said, stopping directly in front of Grace's chair. "I'm Officer Rodriguez with hospital security. I need to ask you a few questions." Grace looked up at him with calm eyes. "Of course, officer. How may I help you?" "You've been sitting here for a while, and I've noticed you seem agitated. Nervous. Is there something wrong?" "I'm waiting for my appointment with Dr. Martinez," Grace replied evenly. "I was told there might be a delay, so I'm being patient." Rodriguez gestured toward her handbag. You've been holding that bag pretty tightly. Mind if I ask what's in it? Grace's fingers instinctively tightened on the leather handles. Personal items, officer. Nothing that concerns hospital security. The response triggered Rodriguez's suspicion radar. In his mind, innocent people didn't hesitate to answer direct questions. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to open the bag for inspection. May I ask why? Grace's voice remained calm, but Martinez noticed a subtle change in her posture, straighter, more alert. Because I'm asking you to, Rodriguez replied, his tone becoming more authoritative. We have reports of theft in the hospital, and your behavior has been suspicious. A few other patients had begun to notice the interaction. The mother with the sick child looked over with concern, while the teenagers paused their scrolling to watch what was developing into an unexpected drama. I haven't stolen anything, Grace said quietly. I'm simply waiting for my medical appointment. Then you won't mind showing us what's in the bag, Rodriguez pressed. Unless you have something to hide. Martinez stepped forward, attempting to de-escalate. Ma'am, if you could just let us take a quick look, we can clear this up and let you get back to waiting for your doctor. Grace considered her options. She could refuse and likely face increasing harassment, or she could comply and endure the humiliation of having her personal belongings examined by strangers in front of other patients. Neither choice appealed to her, but she'd learned long ago that sometimes tactical retreat was the better part of valor. Very well, she said, setting the handbag on the small table beside her chair. But I would prefer some privacy for this. That's not necessary, Rodriguez said, already reaching for the bag. This won't take long. What Rodriguez didn't understand was that Grace's request for privacy wasn't about hiding contraband. It was about protecting memories that were too precious and too painful to be displayed as public entertainment. The bag was old but well-maintained leather, worn soft by decades of use. Rodriguez opened it with the casual disregard of someone who'd never had his own privacy violated, while Martinez watched with growing discomfort. Other patients were definitely paying attention now, sensing drama about to unfold. The first items Rodriguez pulled out were mundane. A prescription bottle with Grace's name on it, reading glasses in a case, a small packet of tissues, a tube of lipstick, and a worn leather wallet. He examined each item as if expecting to find evidence of some unnamed crime, setting them on the table with little care. Heart medication, he announced, reading the prescription label aloud. Digitalis, pretty strong stuff. Grace winced slightly. Her medical information was now being broadcast to everyone within earshot, but she remained silent. Next came a small address book with a faded cover, its pages yellowed with age. Rodriguez flipped through it casually. Lot of names crossed out in here, he observed. Most of these people dead? Many of them, yes, Grace replied quietly. A folded piece of paper emerged next, an appointment reminder from Dr. Martinez's office. Rodriguez unfolded it and read it, as if verifying Grace's story. Satisfied with this piece of evidence, he continued his search. The bag seemed deeper than its external dimensions suggested, with multiple compartments and pockets. From a side pocket, Rodriguez extracted a small, flat case. Opening it revealed reading glasses, a second pair, apparently, along with a small folding magnifying glass. You collect eyeglasses? Rodriguez asked with a smirk. My vision isn't what it used to be, Grace answered. From the main compartment, Rodriguez pulled out a small photo album, the kind with clear plastic pages that had been popular decades earlier. He opened it without asking permission, revealing black and white photographs that were clearly very old. Family pictures? He asked, though he was already flipping through the pages. Grace didn't answer immediately. The photographs were indeed of people who had been like family to her, though not in any way Rodriguez would understand. The pictures showed groups of young people in military fatigues, standing in front of helicopters, gathered around field hospitals, smiling despite the obvious stress of their circumstances. What Rodriguez saw were old military photos. What Grace saw were faces of people she'd loved and lost, colleagues who'd shared the most intense experiences of her life. You were in the military? Martinez asked, the first question that seemed to show genuine interest rather than suspicion. A long time ago, Grace replied. Rodriguez continued his search, now reaching into what appeared to be the deepest compartment of the bag. His fingers encountered something wrapped in soft fabric, something that felt substantial and carefully protected. What's this? He asked, pulling out a bundle wrapped in what appeared to be faded olive green material. Grace's composure cracked slightly. Please be careful with that. Rodriguez's response was to unwrap the bundle with even less care, as if Grace's concern made him more curious rather than more cautious. The fabric unfolded to reveal several items that clearly didn't belong to a typical elderly hospital patient. The first item was a military beret, faded but well preserved, with a distinctive insignia that Rodriguez didn't recognize. Attached to the fabric wrapping were several military medals and ribbons, their metal surfaces tarnished with age but still clearly visible. "What's all this?" Rodriguez asked, holding up the beret. "Playing dress-up?" The question hit Grace like a physical blow. Decades of suppressed memories flooded back, the weight of responsibility she'd carried, the lives she'd saved, the friends she'd lost, the recognition she had earned, and then been forced to hide when she returned to a society that wasn't ready to acknowledge women's contributions to the war effort. "Those items were earned," Grace said, her voice steady but with an undertone of steel that made Martinez look at her more carefully. "Earned how?" Rodriguez pressed. "Women weren't in combat back then." "Officially," Grace agreed, using the same word Isolde had used in the story that inspired this moment. A small crowd had gathered now, not intentionally, but the way people naturally gravitate toward conflict. The mother with the sick child had moved closer, her face showing disapproval of Rodriguez's treatment of the elderly woman. Two orderlies had paused their work to watch, and a nurse had stopped at the nurse's station, clearly concerned about the commotion in the waiting area. Rodriguez held up one of the medals, a bronze star with a distinctive ribbon. "So what's this supposed to be?" "A bronze star," said a voice from behind him. Everyone turned to see Dr. William Harrison approaching from the elevator bank. At 78, Dr. Harrison was one of the hospital's most respected physicians, a surgeon who'd been practicing for over 50 years and whose opinion carried weight throughout the medical center. "I'm sorry," Rodriguez said, "but this is security business, Doctor." Dr. Harrison ignored him completely, his attention focused entirely on Grace. "Major Thompson? Grace Thompson?" Grace looked up at the approaching doctor, and for the first time since the search began, her face showed genuine emotion. "Dr. Harrison, it's been many years." "Indeed it has," Dr. Harrison said, his voice filled with respect. "I believe Officer Rodriguez is examining your service medals?" "Without permission," Grace replied quietly. Dr. Harrison turned to face the security guards, and his demeanor shifted to something that commanded immediate attention. "Officers, you are currently handling the personal effects of Major Grace Thompson, United States Army Nurse Corps, Vietnam veteran, Bronze Star recipient, and one of the finest combat medics I've ever had the privilege of serving alongside." The waiting room fell completely silent. Rodriguez still held Grace's medal, but his grip had become noticeably more careful. "You served together?" Martinez asked. "Major Thompson and I worked together at the 3rd Surgical Hospital in Da Nang," Dr. Harrison explained, his voice carrying clearly through the waiting area. "She volunteered for assignment to forward aid stations, often under fire, treating wounded soldiers in conditions that would terrify most trained medics." Rodriguez looked from the medal in his hand to Grace, confusion evident on his face. "But women weren't in combat zones." "Women weren't supposed to be in combat zones," Dr. Harrison corrected. "But Major Thompson, like many other nurses, went where the wounded were, which meant going into combat." Grace remained seated, but her posture had changed subtly. The frail, elderly woman persona had been replaced by something else, not aggressive, but undeniably strong. "I was just doing my job," Grace said quietly. "Your job included performing surgery in bunkers during mortar attacks," Dr. Harrison continued, addressing the growing audience as much as the security guards. "I personally witnessed Major Thompson save the lives of 17 soldiers during a single engagement, working for 14 hours straight while the base was under siege." The mother with the sick child had moved closer, her expression showing newfound respect. One of the orderlies whispered something to his colleague, and several other people in the waiting area had stopped their conversations to listen. Rodriguez still held the Bronze Star, but now he was looking at it differently. "This is real, very real," Dr. Harrison confirmed. "Major Thompson was awarded the Bronze Star for valor, along with the Purple Heart for wounds received in action and the Vietnam Service Medal with multiple campaign stars." "Purple Heart?" Martinez asked, looking at Grace with new understanding. Grace nodded slightly. "Shrapnel from a mortar round. Some of it is still lodged near my heart, which is why I'm here today for my cardiology appointment." The revelation hit Rodriguez like a physical blow. He'd been harassing a wounded combat veteran, publicly humiliating someone who'd risked her life for her country and carried the physical reminders of that service in her body for over 50 years. "Ma'am, I didn't know," he stammered. "How could you have known?" Grace replied, and there was no anger in her voice, only sadness. Women's service in Vietnam was classified for decades. We were told never to speak of it, never to seek recognition, never to claim credit for what we did. Dr. Harrison placed a gentle hand on Grace's shoulder. Times have changed, Grace. Your generation of nurses is finally being recognized for what you accomplished. Too late for most of us, Grace replied. I'm one of only 6 surviving members of my unit. The waiting room had become completely silent except for the ambient sounds of the hospital, ventilation systems, distant alarms, the quiet hum of medical equipment. Everyone present seemed to understand they were witnessing something significant. Rodriguez carefully placed the bronze star back on the table. His earlier cockiness completely evaporated. Major Thompson, I apologize. I had no right to— Officer Rodriguez, Grace interrupted gently. You were doing what you thought was your job. But perhaps in the future, you might remember that dignity costs nothing to give and everything to take away. Martinez had begun carefully repacking Grace's belongings, handling each item with obvious respect. The photo album, the medications, the personal items that had seemed suspicious minutes earlier were now clearly what they had always been. The treasured possessions of someone who'd lived a full and meaningful life. The Vietnam Women's Memorial was dedicated last year, Dr. Harrison told Grace. Have you been to see it? Grace shook her head. I hadn't planned to. Some memories are better left undisturbed. Perhaps, Dr. Harrison agreed. But perhaps some sacrifices deserve to be remembered, even when, especially when, they were made by people who never sought recognition. A young woman in scrubs had joined the group of observers. Ma'am, she said hesitantly, I'm studying to be a nurse. I had no idea women served in combat in Vietnam. Grace looked at her with the expression of someone seeing the future in a young person's face. What's your name, dear? Sarah Chen. Nurse Chen, the most important thing you can learn is that healing takes many forms. Sometimes it happens in operating rooms, sometimes in emergency tents, sometimes simply by treating people with the respect their humanity deserves. Dr. Harrison checked his watch. Grace, I believe your appointment with Dr. Martinez is in 10 minutes. I'll walk you to cardiology. Grace stood slowly, accepting Dr. Harrison's offered arm for support. As she prepared to leave, she turned back to Rodriguez and Martinez. Officers, thank you for the reminder that my service still matters, even if that wasn't your intention. Rodriguez looked stricken. Ma'am, is there anything I can do to— You can remember this moment, Grace replied, and perhaps use it to see people differently in the future. As Dr. Harrison escorted Grace toward the elevators, the waiting room gradually returned to its normal rhythm. But conversations had started, between the mother and another patient about women in the military, between the orderlies about veterans in the hospital, between Nurse Chen and a colleague about the history they'd never learned. Rodriguez remained standing where Grace had left him, staring at the chair where she'd been sitting. Martinez approached him carefully. You okay, Miguel? No, Rodriguez replied honestly. No, I'm not okay. I just publicly humiliated a war hero because I thought I knew what I was looking at. We all make mistakes, Martinez offered. This wasn't a mistake, Rodriguez said. This was prejudice. I saw an old woman and assumed she was weak, assumed she was suspicious, assumed she didn't deserve respect. The realization was painful but necessary. Rodriguez had been operating on assumptions about age, gender, and appearance that had blinded him to the person sitting in front of him. Meanwhile, Grace and Dr. Harrison walked slowly toward the cardiology department, their conversation carrying the comfortable rhythm of old colleagues reuniting after many years. How many people know about your service? Dr. Harrison asked. Very few, Grace admitted. My late husband knew, of course. My daughter knows some of it. But we were told for so long to keep quiet that it became second nature. The wall in Washington changes that, Dr. Harrison said. The Vietnam Women's Memorial. Your names are there now, officially recognized. Grace paused in her walking. Our names? All of you? The nurses, the air traffic controllers, the intelligence analysts, the journalists, every woman who served. It took 30 years, but you're finally being acknowledged. The emotion that Grace had kept, carefully controlled throughout her ordeal with security, finally threatened to surface. 30 years of silence, 30 years of carrying memories and trauma alone, 30 years of being told her service didn't count, because it hadn't been officially recognized. I'm not sure I'm ready for that, she said quietly. You don't have to be ready, Dr. Harrison replied. You just have to be willing to let people know that heroes come in all forms, including 74-year-old women with heart conditions who once saved lives under fire. They arrived at the cardiology department, where Dr. Martinez's nurse was waiting with Grace's chart. "Mrs. Thompson," the nurse called. "Dr. Martinez will see you now." Grace turned to Dr. Harrison before following the nurse. "Thank you, William, for remembering and for speaking up. Thank you, Grace, for reminding me what courage looks like." As Grace disappeared into the examination room, Dr. Harrison remained in the hallway for a moment, reflecting on the encounter they'd just witnessed. In his 50 years of medical practice, he'd seen countless examples of human strength and resilience, but few as powerful as Grace Thompson sitting quietly in a waiting room, maintaining her dignity while strangers rifled through her most precious memories. Back in the emergency department, the effects of the incident continued to ripple outward. Rodriguez had requested a break and was sitting in the security office, staring at an incident report he couldn't bring himself to write. How do you document the fact that you've just learned something fundamental about respect, dignity, and the danger of assumptions? Martinez found him there an hour later. "Miguel, you need to write up what happened." "How?" Rodriguez asked. "How do I write a report that says I harassed a war hero because I thought she looked suspicious?" "You write the truth," Martinez said. "You write what you learned." Rodriguez picked up his pen and began to write, not a typical incident report, but a reflection on the encounter that would later become part of the hospital's training materials for security staff. "Today, I learned that service takes many forms, and that the people most deserving of respect are often the ones who seek it least. Major Grace Thompson, a Vietnam veteran and Bronze Star recipient, taught me that dignity is not determined by age, gender, or appearance, but by the content of a person's character and the sacrifices they've made for others." Meanwhile, in Dr. Martinez's examination room, Grace was undergoing tests to monitor the shrapnel still lodged near her heart, physical reminders of her service that would remain with her for the rest of her life. "The fragments have shifted slightly," Dr. Martinez explained, studying her cardiac images. "Nothing immediately dangerous, but we'll want to monitor this closely." "I've been carrying this medal for 54 years, Doctor," Grace replied. "It's become part of who I am." "Like your service," Dr. Martinez observed. "Some things become so integrated into our identity that we can't separate them, even when they cause us pain." Grace nodded. "The difference is, I've never regretted the service. The pain is just the price of having done something that mattered." When Grace's appointment concluded, she made her way back through the hospital toward the exit. As she passed the emergency department waiting room, she noticed Officer Rodriguez approaching her. "Major Thompson," he said, his voice formal but respectful. "I wanted to apologize again for my conduct earlier." Grace studied his face and saw genuine remorse. "Officer Rodriguez, what will you do differently next time?" The question surprised him. "Ma'am, you've learned something today," Grace said. "The question is whether you'll use that knowledge to become better at your job." Rodriguez considered this carefully. "I suppose I'll try to see people as individuals instead of making assumptions based on how they look." "That's a good start," Grace agreed. "But I'd suggest going further. Try to see people as potential teachers. Everyone has something to offer, some knowledge or experience that could make you wiser if you're humble enough to receive it." "Even elderly women in hospital waiting rooms?" Rodriguez asked. "Especially elderly women in hospital waiting rooms," Grace replied with a slight smile. "We've had more time to accumulate wisdom." As Grace prepared to leave, Nurse Chen approached her one final time. "Major Thompson, could I ask you something?" "Of course, dear. What advice would you give to someone just starting in healthcare?" Grace considered the question carefully. "Remember that healing begins with seeing people as they truly are, not as you expect them to be. Your patients will teach you more about strength and courage than any textbook ever could, if you're paying attention." "Thank you," Sarah said, "for your service and for your wisdom." Grace made her way to the hospital exit, where Dr. Harrison was waiting with his car. "Let me drive you home, Grace. It's the least I can do." As they drove through the city, Grace looked out at the ordinary people going about their daily lives, shopping, working, raising families. Among them, she knew, were countless other veterans, other people with extraordinary stories hidden behind ordinary appearances. "Do you think it matters?" she asked Dr. Harrison. "What happened today, I mean. Do you think it will change anything?" "I think," Dr. Harrison replied carefully, "that every time someone's assumptions are challenged, every time someone learns to see beyond surface appearances, the world becomes a little more just. What you did today, simply by being who you are, taught several people to think differently. I didn't do anything special, Grace protested. I just sat in a waiting room. No, Dr. Harrison corrected. You sat in a waiting room with dignity. You faced disrespect with grace. You turned harassment into a teaching moment. That's not nothing, Grace. That's everything. That evening, Grace sat in her small apartment, surrounded by the mementos of a life well lived. The bronze star sat on her coffee table next to a framed photograph of her unit from Da Nang, young faces full of determination and hope, most of them now gone. She thought about the day's events, about Officer Rodriguez's education in humility, about Nurse Chen's curiosity about women's service, about Dr. Harrison's reminder that recognition, even delayed, still had value. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. Hello? Major Thompson? This is Captain Lisa Williams from the Veterans Administration. Dr. Harrison gave me your number. I wanted to ask if you'd be interested in participating in our new program connecting Vietnam veterans with current military medical personnel. Grace listened as Captain Williams explained the program. Opportunities for Vietnam veterans to share their experiences with current military medics and nurses, to pass on hard-won knowledge about treating trauma, about functioning under pressure, about finding strength when everything seems hopeless. We particularly need women veterans, Captain Williams continued. There's so much history that's been lost, so many lessons that were never passed down. Grace looked again at the photograph from Da Nang, at the faces of the women who'd served alongside her, who'd saved lives and lost friends and carried secrets for decades. Captain Williams, she said finally, I think I'd like that very much. 3 months later, Grace stood before a room full of military medical personnel at the local VA hospital, no longer hiding her service but sharing it. Behind her was a PowerPoint presentation featuring photographs from Vietnam, including several from her own album, and a timeline of women's military medical service. My name is Major Grace Thompson, she began, and for 50 years I wasn't allowed to tell you this story. In the audience, Officer Rodriguez sat in the back row. He'd requested permission to attend after learning about Grace's presentation through the hospital's Veteran Services Coordinator. Next to him sat Nurse Chen, now finishing her final year of nursing school and writing her thesis on military medical ethics. As Grace began to speak about her service in Vietnam, about the challenges and triumphs of combat medicine, about the bonds formed under fire and the responsibility that comes with holding other people's lives in your hands, Rodriguez understood that his encounter with her in the hospital waiting room had been more than just a learning experience. It had been a moment of grace in every sense of the word. The presentation lasted an hour, followed by questions that went on for another hour. Grace answered each with the same patience she'd shown in the hospital waiting room, turning every question into an opportunity to teach, to share knowledge, to ensure that the lessons learned in the jungles of Vietnam would not be lost to time. As the audience filed out, many stopping to thank Grace personally, Rodriguez approached her. Major Thompson, I wanted you to know that I've been using what you taught me. In my job, I mean. I try to see people differently now. Grace smiled at him. And what have you discovered, Officer Rodriguez? That everyone has a story, he replied, and most of them are more interesting than I ever imagined. That's wisdom worth having, Grace agreed. The question is, what will you do with it? As Grace packed up her presentation materials, surrounded by the grateful faces of young medical personnel who now understood a piece of history they'd never learned in school, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a young woman who'd volunteered for the most dangerous assignments in Vietnam, to a veteran forced to hide her service for decades, to an elderly woman publicly humiliated in a hospital waiting room, to finally, a recognized teacher passing on hard-won wisdom to the next generation. The path hadn't always been smooth, but it had led her exactly where she needed to be, sharing her story, ensuring that the service of her generation would be remembered, and teaching others that respect and dignity are not privileges to be earned, but rights to be honored in every human being. So I ask you, have you ever made assumptions about someone based on their appearance, only to discover you were completely wrong? Have you ever met an elderly person whose quiet dignity suggested depths of experience you'd never imagined? Share their story in the comments. Tell us about the veterans, the survivors, the quiet heroes who walk among us, carrying histories that could teach us all about courage, service, and the true meaning of strength. Subscribe to Hidden Hero Stories for more narratives about the extraordinary people hiding in plain sight, the war heroes working as crossing guards, the decorated veterans stocking grocery shelves, and the remarkable individuals who continue to serve their communities long after their official service has ended. Thank you for watching, and remember, the next time you encounter someone who seems ordinary, consider that they might be carrying medals in their handbag, memories of service in their hearts, and lessons about dignity that could change your life forever. Heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear cardigans and sensible shoes, waiting patiently for doctor appointments, ready to teach us what true service looks like.